All right. So this is the chair metaphor is continuing. And indeed, we are testing our chairs to make sure that they're comfy to sit on, and that they work well. And now that we are writing validators, it makes sense that we want to write tests for them as well. And I saw some of you were already going down this road a bit with the assignment. And this is part of it as well. This is just the last bit of sort of that first lecture phase that I didn't get to earlier. And actually, this is the slide that I want, which is why write tests. And it is so true that if we don't write tests, excuse me, coffee going down the wrong pipe. If we don't write tests, they won't fail. Similarly, do we need to test the tests if they fail? So there's always trade-offs involved. And tests are only one piece of ensuring like software quality and helping us write software that we can be confident in and that we can change while being confident and won't break. But tests are an important piece. The earlier you catch a bug, the less money it costs the company, the less time out of our lives it takes. When I want to refactor and change existing code, if I have tests for that code's behavior, those tests help me catch any implementation errors I might make when I refactor and also give me confidence that the code is working correctly. There's also this term code is documentation, and tests very much function as that as well. So there's a lot of value to tests. There is always a trade-off involved because testing takes time. And for depending on what we're testing, it can take more or less effort. The trade-off is actually pretty good for Django models because they're pretty friendly to test and they get used by so much else. So we get a lot of value out of them. And in general, like the lower level your code is, the closer it is to the heart of the onion. In a lot of ways, the more value there can be to writing tests, and in particular unit tests. And so I'm going to show how to write a test in Django. And you've seen a little bit of examples of this, but we're going to go ahead and do this ourselves. And there already is this tests file that Django created for us in the Pokédex app, in our Pokemon app directory. And it imports this test case class that we are going to use. And since we are using Python, everything is going to be object-oriented, particularly with Django. I do need to import a couple other things to help me out. We're going to import validation error because we are going to be deliberately throwing some errors in our tests. And I need to import, right, let's call this project code, our code. We need to import our model that we want to test. So we are importing the Pokemon model. And let's go ahead and write some tests. And we are creating a test here that will inherit from Django's test case class. That gives us a lot of useful utilities. And I definitely recommend taking a couple minutes just to look at the docs for test case in Django. And the way that we write tests is we can have a class to wrap a whole category of tests, and then we can write a bunch of individual tests. And you want your test names to be expressive and meaningful and useful. And just like any other class method, we need to pass in self. You want each individual test to set up its own data and tear it down. You don't want to share data between tests, at least initially. Sometimes that's worth doing, but it can also cause problems and confusion. So we're going to make Pikachu. And he's going to get a description. And I believe that's really everything that we need. I do want to wrap the test itself in a try except block, because we are going to throw, if the test fails, it'll throw an error. We don't want our whole program to fail, and that's what the try except block does. Let's run full clean. And now we are going to use one of these Django test methods that does exactly what it sounds like. Assert is not none. We assert that this variable, new Pokemon, is not none, that there is something there, that it has been created. And then we will here handle any validation errors that come up. And we'll just, I'll put a print message statement in here. We'll print out the whole dictionary from that error. And if there is an error, we do want this test to fail, and that's what this fail method does. Right, so again, somewhere hiding in here is the Django test case. So here is sort of the walkthrough in the Django docs of tests. It always drives me a little nuts when they do this, because I just want really my API reference of this. But this walks through the different methods that we have available for this. And somewhere out there is the Django API for test case, which is really what I want. It's hiding somewhere in the Django docs. But that other part of the Django docs will be quite useful for us as well. Oh, did someone have a question? And in fact, let me go ahead and run this test. And see how it goes. And I think these blue squigglies are just about empty lines and nothing critical. Of course, I need to have my virtual environment set up. And of course, we use manage.py. And now I run my test file. And lo and behold, it works great. And now if I didn't have this try and accept, let's see what would happen. So the tests run, but we also get this error message. There's also indentation errors, so there were other things going on here. But this, I believe, like if we don't do try and catch, it might actually break our code. Oh, and of course here, these aren't going to be relevant. So there's a number of issues here. I got a little into the weeds there, but the essence is you want to wrap the code that might fail in a try except block and use the except to print out some useful information to help you figure out why the test failed and how to debug it. And it is always a good idea to write a test. Actually, whenever we write a test, I should make sure that it fails the way I expect it to. So let's actually run our test again. And indeed, it fails. It fails for a number of reasons, right? This attribute error does not have a property full clean. And in fact, I'll put assert is not none first, so we can watch that error happen first. And here we get the assertion error and that test fails. So it is always a good idea, like when you write a test, once it's working, tweak it so that it fails on purpose so you can make sure your tests fail the right way as well. Let's add one more test here. And then there are a couple other things I want to talk about and also to see what questions people have. So this test is going to test that our Pokemon has the correct name. And I do recommend kind of following a standard pattern for tests. And I'm just going to use A, B, C. Let's actually do Pikachu and description. Lots of things here in this description we don't have to worry about. So there's really kind of two parts here to this test. This should fail because Pikachu is lowercase. When I run full clean. Right, this actually should throw a validation error. And there is an assertion I could throw in here. Let's see what the error looks like first, and then maybe we can build out our assertion. And of course, if we're in this exception, then we have failed. So let's see what happens now when we run this. So I did get one failure, and that would be Pokemon with correct name. So I do want to, let's see, I print out the traceback. I may circle back to this to clean this test up a bit. I see. Actually, I jumped the gun here a little bit. I apologize. What we can do here is what we are checking here is, or I may have gotten this test a little backwards, but we'll get this running. Sorry. Yeah, I apologize. I did get a little confused. This is a test where we actually wanted to fail. So let's say, let's call this Pokemon incorrect name, capitalized name. And let's see if I may have gotten confused here with something. I may have a typo in my code. Let's see, and in fact, let me pull up our validator. Let's see here, because this actually should be failing for us. So let's see what happens. Oh, I apologize, folks. I think I am missing something a little obvious on this second test. And I may circle back to this to get you all some good guide code for this later. Because I think I lost the thread a little bit. So I think I'll come back to this and I'll update this demo code along with some notes and make sure that that gets pushed this afternoon. Because I think what we saw here that is useful is the basic skeleton of how to write tests. But then where I'm getting a little tripped up is the implementation to write the test correctly so that, you know, it fails when we should. So let me follow up with that. And I apologize about that. But what we do have, and in fact, probably what I need to take a look at is we have a cheat sheet here that's just a list of assertions that you can use in Django to help build these tests. Like if something is true, if they're not equal, if they're false, and then some exception assertions. And this is probably where I'm running into an issue is I think I need to be using an exception assertion and I'm not quite doing it right. So let me come back to that one. So that I do want to give you all some good guide code for that. There is something else that I want to show us though for the last couple minutes of class that is going to be really useful and that we're going to be using for a lot through the rest of the course. So the next dependency we're going to add to our Django projects is called Django REST Framework. And this is really the tool that we use to have Django be more of an API like the Rick and Morty API or the Pikachu API, and then have a React front end that we write use and consume that API and send HTTP requests back and forth. And there's all sorts of really cool things that we can do with this. But just the bit that we're going to look at today is something called serializing, which tackles the issue of, all right, I've got a model, I've got a comment, I've got a Pikachu. Eventually, I want to turn that into JSON formatted data so I can send it across the wire over the internet to the React client program so that it can read it. Or I'm getting some JSON and I want to turn it into an object that looks like a Pokemon so I can put it into the database. And so that's what I want to look at for the last couple minutes of class here. So this serialization, it helps with, mainly it's going to be to and from JSON, but converting from all sorts of formats, basically formatting data to get it into the database. And when we get data out and we want to say, send it back to the user's browser, formatting it again or serializing it. Serializers can also use our validation logic. And when we see how to do relationships, serializers can do that as well. So there's a lot of really cool stuff that serializers do for us. And we do it through using Django REST framework. Today, though, I think we can get away with using just from Django core. Let's see, in fact, if this works. If not, I may just need to install Django REST framework. But let me just play around with this to show a couple examples. So this is in the Django console, and I'm gonna just create a couple Pokemon, and then we can see what this looks like. And let's see if this import works the way that I think it will. and it would help if I spell things correctly. So let's create Pikachu again. Let me make sure that my Pikachu is valid. I'm just going to go ahead and use full clean here. So everything looks good about Pikachu. So, and I'll write a little bit of code in a moment to show this as well. But we're going to use this serialize function that comes from the Django core serializers module. And in a little bit, we'll see using Django REST framework to do this. But let's go ahead, and if I do serialize and I give it the format that I want, which is JSON, and then the list of objects I want to turn into JSON, let's just put Pikachu right there and see how this goes. And lo and behold, we have some properly formatted JSON, which is awesome. And then I can just assign this to a variable. And I must have misspelled something there. But apparently not.
You've got Pikachu serialized, and then you have Pikachu serialized.
Oh my God. There we go. Thank you so much. There we go. And we probably wouldn't do this in models. We're going to talk soon about what views are, but just to very briefly kind of demo where we're going. We're going to be ending up doing something like this. And let's just say we're getting a Pokemon by, I don't know, name. Do stuff to get Pokemon. I want to say, let's call it desired Pokemon. I want to say we can do something like this. I'm not sure if this query statement is correct with Django ORM, but it's in the ballpark. And then we want to do maybe something like this. And there's a way to write all of this much shorter. I'm writing it out more explicitly just for demo purposes. And then we would return this. And now we've written a function that interacts with our model, gets data from the database, and returns JSON. And that's pretty much what we want to send back to the browser. So we're almost there in terms of seeing how to build an API. There is more cool stuff that we can do with serialized.
I think on your import statement, you have importing Pikachu instead of Pokemon.
Oh my God, that would be an issue. That wouldn't affect the model, the Django console code, but that definitely is not correct. Thank you so much there. Let's actually look at what Pikachu serialized is. So Pikachu serialized is a JSON array. Um, and we can't, let's see, Oh, I see. I'm so sorry. I got confused, folks. And in fact, sort of my confusion was the point here. If we look at this, we can see that this whole thing is a string. And that's where I was getting a little lost. I was like, all right, give me the first thing in the list. Give me the second thing in the list. And give me the third thing in the list. And no, I'm getting the actual characters here. And that's not going to really help in terms of how to interact with JSON data. And so Django, or rather Python, has a JSON library. And I'll show how to use it up here as well. But let's say we want to go from the other direction. Let's say we want to add a Pokemon. And we've got some JSON for our Pokemon. And let me go ahead and actually fix that. So that's, we can use the Python JSON library to load some JSON. And it would look something like this. I might, I'll just rename this to JSON data. And I'll just rename this to, we'll just call it new Pokemon. And now if I want to, for instance, now I have an object, new Pokemon. Actually, it wouldn't really be primary key because that hasn't been created yet in this scenario. But name, I think I might need to add a serialization step here. Let me run this in the console as well to see what happens here. So if I do JSON Pikachu, so this is kind of interesting. Yeah, I need to modify this get Pokemon method a little bit. I'll do that in just a minute. But there's a couple interesting things to note here. The first thing to note is when I did this serialization to begin with, in the JSON, it added a property for the name of the Pokemon model that's being used, right? And that obviously is only going to happen when I'm using a serializer connected with a model. And to kind of jump back in time a bit, if we go back to that original command that I ran, it was this command right here where we pass serialize an instance of a model, so serialize can figure out the name of the model. And then when I use JSON loads, it gives me a dictionary. Right, and this gives me an error because it's a dictionary and not instant, or rather it is a dictionary and not an instance of our Pikachu model. And also because it's inside a list. So I have to get the dictionary from the list and then use the get method to get information from the dictionary. And let's see here. It is actually going to be, well, primary key is none, but if we get model, we should get some data back. And now if I look at how to get the name, I see it's actually inside another dictionary named fields. So there can be a little bit of extra work here. and so the serialization, like going in the other direction, this, I apologize. We probably would not want to use the add Pokemon this way. I think I will just come back to that one. Let me pause here because I might go a minute or two longer, but I don't want to go too much further. But I just want to check in and kind of see what questions people have about this basic idea of serializing our data, taking our model and spitting that data out in, say, a JSON format. And also with testing, because I know I kind of I moved relatively quickly through some of that stuff.
So on that one, it gives you none as the primary key. If you did a second one, would it give you one, or would it just not have any primary key?
Oh, with multiple Pokemon, you mean? To answer your question, the reason the primary key here is none is because I never actually saved Pikachu to my database to begin with. If I do, I've got the Pikachu model instance. Let's do full clean just for fun to confirm that Pikachu is good. And now if we save, now let's say I just want to look at like Pikachu ID as a Pikachu primary key. Yeah, there's something else in there already, but now this has ID. And now if I do Pikachu JSON equals serialize JSON Pikachu. And again, I'm missing a U here. I just have a misspelling. So this primary key value is here now. And so now if I did the dance to turn it back into a dictionary from JSON, I've got a list with the dictionary in it. I grab the first item in that list, which is my dictionary. Now that I have a dictionary, I can interact with whatever key and value I want on that dictionary. And I apologize because the primary key is still none, which is not what I would have expected actually. So I'm actually not sure what's going on with that primary key field. That is a good question. And let me write that down and get back to you in Slack on that. I actually may just have missed a step there. The last bit I think I do want to show, and then we can break because I know it's been a long morning, is I do want to install Django REST framework and show a little bit of how we can use it, because there's a lot of powerful stuff we can do with it. And I think probably the last bit of this lecture is definitely worth going through on your own. We're almost home. So I think kind of once I show how to get started, you will be able to move through the rest of it, and we'll be seeing it come up in assignments as well. But let's go ahead and install Django REST framework. And so first I want to make sure that my virtual environment is activated, which it is. I can always look at the path variable and see what the first thing in the path is, and it is indeed my virtual environment directory. And let's install Django REST framework, which we just type out all the way. And now that I have installed this. Under the hood, this is yet another Django app. And I do have to go to settings PY and add this under installed apps. I would put like my own app code last. And we do have to know that the name of this is REST framework, the app name. And that would be in the docs as well for Django REST framework. Like, you know, when you're using one of these, it's worth taking 10 minutes just to read through the install steps and sort of the main things on the README. And that's where you would find these kinds of things out. So this is going to help us make serialization a whole lot easier. And it's going to help us connect serialization to our models even more. So let me make a file in the Pokemon in our app named Serializers. And here we're going to import a couple things. From Django REST framework, we are going to import its serializers method. And we're going to import our Pokemon model. And now let's write a Pokemon serializer class. And it does now have to inherit from this serializer class, excuse me, model serializer that we get from Django REST framework. And this is going to make life a lot easier. Like, I won't have to write this stuff out by hand. And in fact, I'm just going to go ahead and delete this because we're going to want to look at the serializer really as our guide here. I think that goes away and that goes away. So this meta class that is like this sort of special class that's assigned to all of our models, and that we can assign here as well, because this model serializer is meant to be used with models, is where we put sort of all of this important metadata that really glues and connects everything together. And Django uses it to sort of glue these pieces together. And we have to specify what model we're doing this for, and note that we're not creating an instance, we're not creating an object, we're not creating an instance of the Pokemon class. We are passing the actual like namespace for the class itself, the class definition, so that then this model serializer knows what model class it should use for all the magic it's going to do. And then we also need to tell it the fields that we care about for serializing. And let's see if we can't get this working in the console. And now, let's see, I want to import my model because I need to create a Pokemon model. I'm just going to make sure that that exists. And I need to import the serializer. I want to make sure that I have that spelled right. And indeed I don't, because I did Pokédex app, which in hindsight, I really should have just done Pokemon model. And let's just quickly create a Pokemon. Let's see. Not even sure if I have a Pokemon in the database. I may not have ran. And I do, but it's not Pikachu, it's Bulbasaur, because I was saving stuff to our database before. And that is totally fine. We can work with Bulbasaur, and I'm just going to do a quick rename here so I don't get confused. And now let's use this serializer. And let's make sure that that did what we expected to do. And I have an instance of the Pokemon serializer that's using the Pokemon class, specifically for Bulbasaur. And let's see what we can do here. If I do Bulbasaur serializer.name, I get an error. What if I do .get name? And in fact, I get an error there too. What if I do with the arrow bracket? So that does work, and I would have to poke around under the hood exactly why the .get works. I think because this is not a proper dictionary. Django sort of has like, there's like a very dictionary-like class that we're using here. But I can see that. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, no, no worries. But I can see like we get all this extra information. And then if I really just want to get all the stuff, I can use this .data property that is on the class. And that gives me the JSON of the whole thing. And then this becomes much, much easier. Excuse me, I would say this is more of a dictionary. I apologize. This is a dictionary, but then we can turn this into JSON really easily. And I think I do want to wrap here. There's a little bit more stuff that's cool to see. And it's worth, I think, just reading through the last bit of this lesson, but I know we ran a bit long, and I really appreciate all of you sticking around. So let me just check in and see what questions people have before we wrap up.
I just personally, I think I need time to digest all this because it's a lot that was thrown at us. But yeah, I think on the whole, it makes sense. There's just a few things I need to figure out.
Yeah, the serializers I moved through rather quickly. The testing, I think I'll follow up with a better code pattern that you all can follow. The important thing here with serializers, I walked through this a bit, but just to recap, we want to install Django REST framework, right, which I've already done. When we install it, we do need to add that to settings.py because where it's a Django app under the hood. And then what this lets us do is create what's called like a serializer class for a model. And in essence, what this does is I don't have to manually write code to turn my model into, say, like JSON, or if I get JSON to turn it into my model, this will do that work for me. At sort of like a very high level, that's what's going on here. And Josh, yes, sir, I saw your hand up.
Yeah, I was just wondering where you install Django REST framework, but it's in your project, right? Which is called Pokedex Validators, which is confusing because you have another Pokedex Validators folder?
Yeah, good question. So the important thing to know is when I'm using a Python virtual environment, it doesn't matter what directory I run pip install in. I could be in my home directory and I could run pip install, I don't know, whatever I want to install. Once the Python virtual environment is activated, I can run pip install from wherever I want, and it is always installed inside this lib or library directory of the actual like virtual environment directory. And actually, let's find some Python. Let's find some Python package to install that we can. Anyone got like a good small Python package? We'll do Flask. I don't know why we would want to install Flask in a Django project, but just to demo this. So I'm in my home directory right now, but the virtual environment is activated. Lo and behold, look what pops up in .vem, blah, 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 Flask. So that's a little different, I know, than NPM. And again, that's what the Python virtual environment is doing. So for when we're using pip, it really doesn't matter where we run that install command from. What does matter is once I've installed Django REST framework, I do have to go into the settings PY for the project, which is floating around here somewhere. And I do have to add it to installed apps. Yeah, and great question, Josh, because I think that it's a little counterintuitive with Python virtual environments until you kind of get a handle on what they're doing. What other questions do people have? Okay, let me quickly take a look at the assignment, the second assignment for today, and then we will wrap up. So this first one does have a bit about testing. There are some tests here. I would recommend actually reading through these tests. I think that will help with the bit that I talked about writing tests a little while ago. So I know the second test I wrote got a little wonky. And you can kind of see in here some good patterns to follow for tests. And these tests are all negative assertions, like we're expecting things to fail. For these other assignments, building on the school API, and by the way, for all of these school projects, please do just use the same Django project and build up. Otherwise, I think it can take a lot of time and work. So you will get plenty of practice writing serializers today. And I think you'll find that it's a lot more straightforward than it seems. That it's really, we just need to create the serializer class, give it the model name, and give it the fields that we want, and then we get to use it. And then here we do have an assignment to continue practicing and working on validations. So finishing up the one from this morning, I think is priority 1. And then this serializers one is very much priority 2. And that's it. We'll do a code demo at stand down. And I'll be around in the afternoon to chat on Slack and answer questions. So thank you all very much. And let me stop